we get started, let me just turn to the panel and just ask each of you if there's one thing that you would say is just kind of the most important thing for you to think about in terms of ministry in the IBC youth. What would that be? How would you answer that question? What's a prime key best practice that you would say is most important from your point of view and your experience?
I think there are a lot of things that I could say from my experience in the IBC, but the one thing that constantly made a difference in my ministry at IBC Stuttgart was developing a strong team. I had the privilege to work with a lot of really great people. And by investing in them and equipping in them, we were much more effective and able to make a much broader impact than if it were just me doing everything. And adding to that strong team is enabling your team to do the ministry, enabling them to teach, enabling them to lead, stepping to the side to give them opportunities, because oftentimes those prove to be some of the best moments that we experienced during my time at Stuttgart.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Taylor.
I would say one of the key things, and this is a kind of if I were to go back and do it again, what would I do? I would make sure to not label any kid like a teen, a good teen, and say, oh, they're good, they're fine with the Lord. Let me worry about other teenagers. Let me use them to help me out, but let me worry about some other teenagers. It's hard to know what's going to happen in the future, and sometimes I've had teens who I've considered, good, wonderful, in love with the Lord. I've seen them move on to college and change their minds, and one of my regrets is not being able to share the gospel with them more.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, I would echo exactly what Taylor said. There are many things to consider and many things worth considering, but my personal philosophy of ministry is that whether in youth ministry or elsewhere in ministry, that I am called to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, right? And so in student ministry, man, you're like, I can only, and you can only connect with so many people, and you're only able to have a personal impact on so many people, so many students. And so by investing in volunteers, investing in those who also care about teens in the church, you're going to be able to really multiply the gospel impact that you're able to have. And I'm really grateful, Taylor, that I inherited a really strong team from you, that I was able to deploy pretty much as soon as I got here into the ministry. So yeah, if were I starting from scratch, things would have been a lot harder at IBC than they have been for me.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Dylan. Leon, do you have something you'd add?
Yes, thank you. For me, one thing which is really important is to rethink discipleship making here. I said this because often in my ministry, I focus too much on event and fun and all these things that pull people together, excite them. But what I found out lately was that disciples are not mass produced. They are handmade, person to person. So I would faithfully look after the children that God gave me in my hand. Even if I cannot expand that, I would be faithful to that one. And I would redefine discipleship making again.
Thanks for that. As I heard two themes, one is volunteers and the other is disciple making. I can really relate to the importance of volunteers, but I haven't seen the question in Q&A or in chat. But my question is where do you find volunteers? I mean, how does that happen? I know that for a matter of years we prayed at IBC Berlin for volunteers, and it wasn't until God raised up somebody that took some leadership there. How would you address that issue?
Uh, One of the things that we found, my wife served as the adult discipleship coordinator while we were at IBC, and one of the things that both of us found is that we initially struggled to find volunteers, and the solution we found was simply to go and cultivate volunteers. You can't necessarily expect people to come to you and say, "Hey, I have a heart for students and I'd love to work in your student ministry." Some people will do that, but most people won't, even if they've had experience in it. And so, literally, pray, go into church, identify people, meet with them for coffee, and ask them, "I want you to serve in the student ministry. Will you pray about that? And then will you join us?" I found that to be the most effective way to get volunteers, just to go and get them.
Thanks, Taylor.
For me, I would borrow a Chinese philosophy, which says when the student is ready, the teacher begins to appear. I think one thing very important is that when the need is seen, people step out, and that has to be presented strongly, that we need this, and in this area we need that, and in that area we need this, and things has to be clearly pointed out.
Mhm. So proclaiming the need, praying, recruiting, asking people. Couple of good things there. Here's a question that Carlos brings. It says, "What's the IBC view of the teens ministry, and what is the short or long-term direction or objectives?" I think Carlos asks a good question here. How is it that how do you develop a vision for your ministry to teens? Uh, what would you say to that? How does that happen for you, or what has been your experience developing a vision for ministry to teens in your context in your church?
I think it's something like this sort of a vision. It starts with really your theology of ministry, right? So, what are we called to do in any ministry? Not simply teen ministry or youth ministry, but ministry. What are we called to do here? And the call for us, as we've already hinted at a little bit, the call for all Christians, but certainly for us, is to make disciples. And as we have been called to make disciples, uh, those of us who have been called to ministry have been called specifically to equip those in the church in their task of making disciples. And so, right, like the goal of a good youth ministry is the goal of any good ministry, and that is to share the gospel, train up students to know what they believe, why they believe it, to point them to Jesus, right? And like Leon was saying just a moment ago, this isn't something that's easily mass produced, right? It takes discipling someone it is a long game that you're playing. But man, the payout at the end for that discipleship, that's what this is all about. Equipping them and seeing them grow just one step closer to Jesus a day at a time.
Mhm. So it's a long game. It's not something that just happens overnight. It's relational. That's what I've heard you say, and it invests in people. Thank you for that. Uh, as a as a pastor of a church, I would say that an important aspect of any ministry in the church is to make sure that you are working together collaboratively with the other ministries of the church. And as Dylan was talking about, I mean, that's true for a church ministry, and just coming alongside that would be important, and be on the same page there. That's for sure. That's good. Some of you have uh, seen that I have made available microphones. That's as best I can do right here with what I have. If you would like to ask a question by saying it as opposed to typing it, if you do the little raise or, raise your hand icon there, I can see that, and you can just go ahead and unmute your mic and ask the question like that. But we've talked a little bit about vision. We've talked a little bit about some of the best practices, how we might look at volunteers. Curriculum was another interest when it comes to doing youth ministry, ministering to teens. What have you found to be helpful in terms of curriculum and ministry to teenagers? Perhaps in the chat, if you have a particular uh, uh, type of curriculum that you're using, you could tell us what you're doing, what you're using there. So anybody have something that you would say, any panelists would say something about that and about curriculum?
Swan Leon, go ahead, or Jeremy.
I've used several curriculums in the past, and I think I would definitely say there's no one curriculum that's going to be perfect for everyone when I say this. And so you just have to see what fits your church, what fits your church's budget, what fits your international kids at the church. We have used Lifeway's curriculum before, and we find that to be very gospel centered. I think I've really enjoyed teaching from Lifeway. I've also done Orange in the past, and Orange is another curriculum. They're very forward thinking, lots of videos, lots of interactions, and so those are two of the curriculums I've used. Both of them are a bit costly, and so they might not be the best fit to some churches. At other times, I've kind of made up my own curriculum. I've sought the Spirit and said, what do we best need to teach our children at the moment, our teens? What is going on in their lives, and how can I address that from God's Word?
That's good. Thank you. You see in the chat, there's a couple of other things that we've seen, answers in Genesis. Others have enjoyed Lifeways, the Gospel Project. Roberta says, raised a hand. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
We sure can.
Yeah, great. So recently I discovered Right Now Media, which I understand that a lot of IBC churches now have access to.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a curriculum for the whole year. Basically, they have a run that would take you for the whole year. They suggest topics, and they have, like, I don't remember, 4 or 5 different main goals for the year, and then you can choose in between those from different speakers and different specific topics. So I really recommend you to check that out. It's been very helpful for me so far.
Fantastic. Thank you. Each of our churches has a free access to that, and you can make that available to everyone in your church. If you want some information about that, you can find that information on our web page, our IBC web page, and contact the Developing Resources Director, Judith Lynn, who makes Right Now Media accessible to us. There are also on our IBC resources page some resources that have been recommended by other churches that you might find available there. Thank you for that good word. Other panelists have a suggestion for curriculum other than the ones that we have heard?
I would just jump one quick thing. We ended up writing our own curriculum for 4 years. We found that there was no curriculum that really reached broadly to international students, and we worked together as a team in a collaborative effort for 4 years to write curriculum. It was not easy, but it was worth it. And so I would highly encourage you, if you have a highly motivated team, to give that a shot.
You point out something that is definitely an issue, and that is in the international church, English speaking international church that's multicultural in many settings. Some of the prepared curriculum just doesn't really seem to fit perfectly. And so it's a real challenge to find that. So it is one of those difficulties. Questions I see in the Q&A. Let's jump into some of these. Jaime asked the question, COVID has brought lots of new challenges for youth ministries after these past few months. Do you have advice you could share on how to be effective during these COVID times? What would you say about that? What are ways others have been staying connected to youth during COVID restrictions besides Zoom meetups? Anybody have any response from the panel, or if you have any suggestions, or you want to raise a hand and as somebody else and could answer that as well, we'll do that. Anybody in the panel have any ideas there?
For sure. So we're living this right now. Yeah, so here in Germany, like most other places in Europe, we are back on lockdown, right? And so we've been in lockdown since the beginning of November, and we faced the challenge that while religious services are technically still allowed, we thought that we were really playing with fire if we kept meeting as a youth group. We wanted to protect the church and still be able to meet on Sundays. And so we said, we're gonna only focus our efforts on Sunday mornings. And so for IBC Stuttgart, that has looked like anything that happens outside of Sunday morning, including youth, isn't happening in person right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I will be completely honest with you, when we made that decision, it was really challenging and really kind of a bummer, as I'm sure many of you are feeling right now, especially thinking back to the spring and like the steady decline in attendance of online youth events. And so I'll just share that what we have done is, again, I have really leaned into my team of youth volunteers, especially over the last month. And I've encouraged them to, first of all, connect personally with the students that they already have some connection with, to make sure that they're trying at least once a week to be reaching out to students and just touching base, seeing how people are doing, seeing how they can be praying for people. I'm doing that myself, reaching out to students and to parents and to families individually, and just checking up on people to see how they're doing. But also, we moved our youth programming back online, back onto Zoom. And I know Zoom is like a 4-letter word now at this point in all of our vocabulary, right? And I was as unexcited about moving youth group onto Zoom as I think any of our youth were. I did not want to do it at all. But man, I'll just say, I was challenged in my thinking on this, because there's a way to do these online things poorly, and there's a way to do them well. And the way to do them well, especially with teenagers, I think, is, I'm a guy that likes to really exposit and dig into the passage that we're in that night. And when you're doing that on Zoom, and you can't do it for 40 minutes, right? You gotta keep the lessons either short or interactive, or ideally both. And so what we've done is we diverted from our study through the Gospel of John to 4 weeks of their questions. So had the students submit questions, and we've been answering those questions so that felt needs are being met, right? But it's not just me teaching through their questions and the answers to their questions. What we've done since we're on Zoom is I'll ask the question, and then I'll randomly assign them to the breakout groups and send them off to talk about it for 10 or so minutes. Then we get back together as a big group, have all the individual groups share what they think about the question. I'll summarize, I'll share what I think about the question. And so our 4 weeks of that are ending tomorrow. It's been really great, actually. We've actually seen more students attending each week rather than less students attending each week, which is really cool in this Zoom season. And so tomorrow, next week, we're going back into still on Zoom, but our study in the Gospel of John, and we're going to try to follow a similar format, right? Have a short lesson. We're going to have discussion questions that our volunteer leaders are going to help lead discussions. And we're going to go into breakout groups. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about them as a big group and use that format, because the students, I think, are, they're zoomed out, sure, but they're also really hungry for interaction with other believers. So don't discount what the Lord can do even through Zoom in this season.
Sure, that's good. Sounds like you've customized the experience to fit the needs and using Zoom to do that, having to deliver it in a different way. It's definitely restricted activities, face-to-face kinds of meetings. I know that in limited ways, there's still some opportunities to get together, and some groups are doing that. There's a groups feature on Right Now Media. You can see that in the chat. Others are doing handwritten postcards to make sure that people are staying in contact. Some kinds of things that are happening along those lines. A couple of other questions. One of them has to do with topics that are challenging topics that are oftentimes taboo. How do you deal with subjects such as sex and pornography and gender identity against the culture that is got a different way of looking at these things than we do in our Bible believing Jesus-centered churches? Somebody, how do you deal with those subjects in your context?
I think really basically do it. One, talk about it. They're talking about it outside of church, and so we definitely need to be talking about these things inside of church. Talk honestly. There's no need to sugarcoat anything, because they're hearing all of it in school with their friends, what they see online. And listen. Don't just come in guns blazing with answers. Listen to the students, listen to their concerns, empathize with them. And then when you do respond, share the truth of God's word in a loving, empathetic, honest way. Students can smell fakeness and they don't like it. So just be real with your students when you talk about these topics. And don't be afraid. They want to talk about these topics with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Jeremy?
I have used lots of resources to help me in planning for this. What am I going to say? There are people who have already thought about this, and they've written books about this. And they've written specifically to teenagers. And unfortunately, at the moment, I'm blanking on some of these resources. But what I would say is go to Google, go to Amazon, look at some books, order them, read them. You never know what perspective they're coming from and how biblically strong they are. So make sure you read the resources before you say, let's study it. But yeah, I would say use those resources. There are people who have worked hard to produce them for you. So don't be afraid. Don't think you have to reinvent the wheel here.
That's good. Thanks, Jeremy. I've also go ahead, Leon. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think this bring up a huge discussion, because this is really important to address here. One thing that we know is that it's not very comfortable to talk because we are not used to it. And often they do have the answer. The teens, they have their own way of responding it. But what they do need, as I see, is a ear to listen and a relationship rather than a textbook or something that can tell them not to do and do things. It's not about how much they know what not to do and what to do. It's about who do they have. And most of the teens, for example, um, at least in my observation, do not have adult relationship apart from their parents. Many of them do not have someone they can run to apart from their parents. And that's an issue, in my opinion. And that will solve at least part of it if we can develop that.
Thanks for that, Leon. That's a great truth there. And you also bring up the issue of parents uh, as as youth ministers, as people ministering to teenagers. We have an unusual opportunity to partner with parents as well. And one of the questions that we have here is how have you engaged the parents and helped them to take ownership of their children's spiritual upbringing? Uh, One of the things that I've found helpful is a website and an app called Parent Q that gives parents age appropriate guidance to how to best interact with their children. They also provide some wonderful discussion guides that you can make available to parents and use in your teen ministry as well. But how would you say uh, we can better include or engage parents in the ministry to their teenagers?
I think it's definitely a full church effort. I think as churches are focusing on discipleship, I think that the more they talk about discipleship, the more it needs to be continually said, not just by the youth minister or youth team, but also by the pastors, also by other ministry leaders. That discipleship is massive, and parents have the greatest discipleship opportunity that anyone could ever have. Sometimes you look and you pray for disciples. You say, Lord, lead me to some people that I can minister to. But parents actually have people they can minister to for 18 plus years, hopefully lots more than 18 years. But yeah, it's just this massive opportunity that they're losing if they're passing it on to the youth ministers, youth team, and to the church. They're losing a massive opportunity. We have to make sure that we continue to say that.
Thanks for that. Somebody else, another one of the panelists. How do you engage parents?
I completely agree with Jeremy here. The youth workers are not to replace or to stand on behalf of the parents. We are just to supplement or to help. So one thing is it's in the adult ministry where they needs to be educated about this and how we can share with the church and the home responsibility. And one thing that really worries me, it also come up in the BBC several times that, people struggle to stay home. And my question is why? During this COVID time, it has revealed the most ugly part of us, our family. People don't want to stay home. They find it hard to stay with their parents. They find it hard to stay with their partners. And I think something has to be done about this. Home is not safe anymore. Then how can we say that our church will be safe either if home is not safe? So I think it has to do with our educating the parents as well.
I hear you saying it's really a whole church project, if you will, to include parents as well as teens. Uh, it's kind of strange for me to say something like this in a youth ministry webinar, but uh, I think, intergenerational connections, and making sure that ministries, age group ministries, are integrated into the life of the church are very important, and what I've heard. So it's important for pastors like me and other church leaders to make sure that ministries like teen ministry are not just something separate and over there, but are integrated into the life of the church, and there's an intergenerational connection. Um, Last question here, and then I'm going to ask Jeremy to introduce us to some of the thoughts that the team has been thinking about Euroventure. But someone has asked this: their studies, particularly curriculum, or the way we approach teaching our teenagers, uh, is sometimes very cyclical, and kids kind of like, oh, this again. When it comes to topics, particularly when we deal with teenagers and things. And the question is, how do you cultivate a deeper love for Christ within the scope of the topics covered if they're cycled through yearly? Is it perhaps feasible to alternate topic studies and books of the Bible? How would you, given the needs of teens and discipleship, integrate those things so that we're really nurturing a deeper love for Jesus and walking with Jesus daily? How would you answer that question?
I guess this kind of swings us back around to our curriculum conversation from earlier, right? But um, and to Taylor's point, even when we used the Gospel Project curriculum this summer, we heavily edited their examples and other things to make them context appropriate. Um, but I think that, yeah, for sure, like I'm a big proponent of teaching through books of the Bible, because, well, first of all, God in the Bible has given us all that we need for life and godliness, right? He's told us that we have all that we need for life and for godliness in the scriptures. Um, so yeah, I mean, if like thinking back to when I was growing up in church, and I more or less grew up attending church for most of my life. I remember being that kid who was like, okay, we kind of talk about the same topics the same time of year every year. Um, and that's not to say that there aren't certain topics that are worth revisiting, right? Um, but what we do anyway with the team, we try to think through what are the topics that we need to talk about. We're going to assume that on average, a student's going to be with us, because of the transient nature of IBC, 3 years max. The average student's going to be here. So in those 3 years, what are the things so that we can get this, God willing, the Lord using our teaching, right? What do we need to talk about so that this student has been exposed to what they need to be exposed to for the next step in their journey with Jesus? So we figure out what are those things, right? Like some of the things we've already talked about tonight would be on that list. Sexuality, apologetics, right? Why you believe what you believe, who is Jesus, all of those sorts of things. So you get those on a list. And then where, the next question that I personally, and maybe your philosophy of ministry differs from this, and that's fine, but me, what I say is, okay, where in the Bible are these things addressed? Now let's take those books of the Bible and let's work our way through them, teaching like expositionally through these books of the Bible, and we're gonna address. So we get 2 for 1, right? We get to work through books of the Bible expositionally. What that does is that teaches the students, to read the Bible for themselves as we're working through it together. But also, on the other hand, we're hitting these topics, very difficult topics that I would sometimes avoid, were I just choosing the topics that we were addressing. But when I commit myself to teach through, I don't know, 1 Corinthians, if we were going to do that, goodness, there is all sorts of stuff in 1 Corinthians that this day and age, somebody who's just choosing things that are comfortable isn't going to choose to address. And so when you commit yourself to teach through a book of the Bible, you're committing yourself to accountability. You're committing to be able to teach the students how to read the Bible for themselves, and you're committing to all sorts of topics that you wouldn't otherwise be raising. And I find great comfort in this because, again, God has given us in his word all that we need for life and godliness.
That's a good word, Dylan. That's for sure. Yeah. Go ahead, Taylor.
I think there's also a really important aspect of student ministry that we haven't touched on. We talked a lot about teaching, which is vital, it's essential, but also challenging students, setting goals, having accountability. I kind of view student work when you meet with the students a little bit more like Bible study style. And there's a great method called the 3/3 method of leading a small group that doesn't just give input to students, but it provides equal space for input for what you've applied last week and for what you're going to do in the next week. We all got bored as students in class listening to the teacher who just droned on and on and on. So give them space to talk and set real goals for your students. In this week, what are the things you're going to do to apply this to your life? And next week, we're going to ask you, how did you do that? Someone share some examples with us, so on and so forth. Engage them in a way that motivates them to apply what they're learning.
That's a good word, guys. Yeah. What I'm hearing is something that sounds a lot like approach teenage ministry like you would making disciples, addressing key topics as necessary in the context of, taking students to the Word, teaching them how to get into the Word and to learn those skills. That's big. That's huge. We're at a place now where we're coming to kind of a transition. We want to give the team an opportunity to talk a little bit about Euroventure here, but I've come to a conclusion that we've not exhausted the topics, and nor have we answered all of the questions that are just burning in your hearts and your minds. I have here your registration addresses and would like to propose that we do this again sometime in the future to build something of a connection between those of us who have a heart for teenagers and see how we might strengthen one another. So I'm going to give the list to the team that's the panelists here and let you guys as a group discuss ways that you can connect with one another and further this discussion that's been very helpful. So thank you to the panelists, but I'm going to go ahead and defer to you, Jeremy, to let you introduce something about Euroventure and its role in IBC youth ministry.
Yes, thank you. I am the current lead of the IBC youth team, which is all of the panelists that we have today, plus some other members. And I have been on the team, I think, about 8 years now. And Euroventure is a camp in Switzerland. It's in Grindelwald, Switzerland, a very beautiful, picturesque town right in the heart of the Swiss Alps. It's a wonderful camp for kids to come to. It's a very international camp where people from all over our IBC churches gather together and get to experience the joy of camp and the beauty of Switzerland, the beauty of the mountains, and all that comes with that, all the activities that are available. And so it's a wonderful camp to consider. I would personally say some type of camp is really, as long as, of course, COVID allows, a must for teenagers to experience. Because I think God works incredibly in these times. And I've often been amazed and astounded as a youth pastor who brings his students to camp and just sees what God is doing in this space, in this place, which he isn't doing sometimes in the yearly ministry. So I've seen kids make decisions for Christ because they came to camp, and so I think it's a great investment of your time, of your money, because it's an investment in the spiritual lives of your teenagers. So that's a little introduction. I can let the rest of the team say some other things if they wish.
And thank you, Jeremy. And I also want to point out that um, it very much depends on the timing when the students are having holidays, and some places they don't have the same holidays. So if there is any a problem with that, we'll be happy to listen to you and see what we can do about it and what we can develop out of that. Because one thing that we haven't heard is that to be available for our kids, our teens, and it is important that we listen to your story. You need to tell us.
I would also jump in. I've served with the Euroventure team for, I think this would be my 5th year. And I have benefited enormously. I was actually skeptical of it my first year at IBC Stuttgart. I was unsure if it was worth it. And then Jeremy and another person dragged me down there to check it out myself. And I looked at him and said, this is the best camp I've ever been to. I can't believe that I took so long to get down here, and I'm bringing a ton of students next year. And we did, and it's been great. Also, we try to be intentional about who we bring to teach the students. Our speaker is Jody Esquerra. He's the student minister at IBC Singapore. He is Filipino, and he is serving in an international church. And so he looks like the students, he talks like the students, and he has the experience of international students. And so I would say it's a huge benefit to students who oftentimes, just to be frank, see white American men teaching in their churches, to see someone who looks different from a white American man teaching in their church. So I would highly encourage you to check it out for that reason as well.
Thank you for that. Questions perhaps about Euroventure. First of all, what is the date that we're planning on Euroventure, Lord willing? I think perhaps Leon sort of suggested that listening to dates was a possibility. Help us understand that more clearly, guys.
I could say our official dates for Euroventure this year, which are set. Unfortunately, we can't change anything this year. But if there is an issue with your church, we can be flexible for future years about dates. But for this year, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the 3rd of July through the 9th of July, if my memory serves me correctly.
Very good. There we have it now in the chat window. Euroventure Summer Youth Camp, July 3 through 9. Specifically designed for IBC churches. And you guys can give us more input and information as it comes. When do we begin signing up and those kinds of things?
Sign up is normally around March, April timeframe it begins. But signups can happen in any time up to camp. There's always a early bird fee, so you pay a lower amount if you sign up early. But we've taken kids in the past who have signed up the day before if there's still space in our camps.
Okay, that's great. That's good. That's good to know. And of course, 2021, at least the beginning of the year, will be very similar to 2020. Lord willing, we will be rescued from the lockdown and the virus as we get beyond the spring, and we'll be able to see everybody in Grindelwald at Euroventure. Let me say thank you to the panel for your help. But also, I'm going to say you have an assignment. I'm going to give you guys the email addresses, and let's do this again. If you have questions that you would like to ask any of the panelists, what we're going to do is we'll make sure in a follow-up email to you, we'll give you a way to contact us so that we can come alongside you and help you and support you in your ministry to teens. Lots of questions that we didn't have answered tonight. The conversation will continue. Question here. There we go. Thank you, Jeremy. Good. Got in the chat. There is a link to the Euroventure camp. Any other questions from the attendees before we get out of here? Anything else that you would like to ask or contribute to the conversation? Got a couple of thank yous in the chat. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
There's
Appreciate
a question in
everybody.
the Q&A, Scott.
There we go. All right. Matthew, go ahead and if you would, ask your question, unmute and ask your question.
Hello. Since we're in, that's not my picture, by the way. That's
I thought I recognized you there.
the question I have, since we're still, even though here in Dubai things are starting to open up a little bit, travel is still very much restricted, as it were. Since we're all meeting online anyway, would be possible for one of these, maybe not, maybe in the near future, we could do an IBC Youth online webinar for the kids, so that we could all see kids from all over the world and see that we all love Jesus. I don't know if that's something that have been taught before, or something that we could tap into. Just leaving that out there.
Cool idea. Love the idea. That's awesome.
Also, Matthew, if you could send Scott and the team some concrete ideas about what that would look like and what exactly you'd be looking for, that would be helpful for us as we move forward to talk about doing things like that.
Cool.
Okay.
Online youth rally.
Which email do I?
Here we go.
Who do I do?
Let me just go ahead and put this right here in the chat. Connections at ibc-churches.org. I'll do that here as we're kind of answering another question. Another good idea is there some way to equip our leaders to follow up the teenagers who've been to Euroventure as well? I love the idea of equipping and training our teen workers. And panelists, would you care to answer that as I type this?
Get on social media, follow the students, and interact with them there.
Okay. Okay. So social media. Yeah, you mean our kids are on social media?
Yeah, not Facebook or Twitter, Instagram at the absolute minimum, TikTok if you have a little more time and energy, things like that.
Yeah, I would say in addition to following up with students not in your church, if you want to follow up with students that are in your church, if folks make decisions and that sort of thing, then we can definitely make those names available to the churches that those folks belong to.
Good. Feedback directly to the leaders for kids that have made decisions at Euroventure. Yeah. Thank you, guys. I heard a lot about disciple making, about relationships, about the scripture. I heard a lot about just coming alongside parents and the church. We're in this together. It may feel like we are indeed separated by distance, and Zoom is a poor substitute for us being together. But we are not alone. The promise of Jesus is he would be with us always. And we are not alone because we have a wonderful family of churches that have experienced and gone through some of the same things that you are going through. So please reach out to our youth ministry team, reach out to me and Building Connections if there's any way that we can come alongside you and be of help to you in God's call on your lives to serve teenagers and to share the gospel, to see teenagers come to faith, growing in maturity, and then equipped to serve God's purpose, his kingdom mission in the world. So we're here to help. We're glad that God has not left us alone. Thanks again to the panelists. We appreciate very much your time, your preparation, and thank you to those that are in attendance. You'll hear from us in a follow-up about some of our future plans. Thank you, and God bless. Thank you for being a part of this evening.